There we go. Everybody see the screen.
Got it.
See my information on screen. Okay. So generally when we open the meetings up, we give a quick overview of AFCEA. We have some people that may not be familiar with it, but AFCEA Atlanta is a not-for-profit professional organization. We've been around for about 50 years, and we focus on cyber command control communications, computers, and intelligence to connect people, ideas, and solutions. And we serve the greater metropolitan region, Atlanta metropolitan region, north of Robbins and west of Fort Gordon. And so we have a base at Dobbins Air Reserve Base where we're at today. And then we have the University of North Georgia, who has recently formed a student chapter just to the north of us. We have about 300 members, 65 corporate members, and about 25% of our members are lifetime members, meaning that they can't get away from us. So, AFCEA International is our parent organization, and they have approximately 30,000 members worldwide, 139 chapters, and about 1,502 corporate members. Chapter activities, we generally service the community, federal agencies, and universities around Atlanta, and we also have a number of participating corporations. Our meetings are generally monthly, and we do CEU training. We connect with local resources to provide timely and relevant topics at our monthly meetings. And we also do teacher tool grants, scholarships, and we provide judges for science fairs around the area. Every year we support the USO, and they have a holiday block leave where thousands of troops come home in a very short period of time, and the USO gets overwhelmed. So we help support that. And then we support agencies through networking, providing resources that are available locally. We recently held a Homeland Security Summit down at Georgia Tech Global Learning Center, and we had about 75 people that participated. It was the first live conference that we've had here locally in quite a bit. It was the first live conference they had at Georgia Tech since March of last year. So we're happy to have that. We are working on other small business industry days and other events that might be of interest. Today, we have John Hackmeyer, who is the owner of CyberCrocodile LLC, and he'll be walking through, am I ready for the CISSP? And John, you want to take it away?
Sure. You, you stop your share, and then I'll, there we go, perfect. Let me see, get this thing up here. And hopefully now you guys can see my title slide.
We can.
All right, awesome. So welcome everybody. Thanks for having me. Looking forward to this, and I'm gonna just kick it right off and get started here. So some stuff we're going to talk about. Here's the agenda, and just so you know, I do happen to have 3 kids, and I am interrupt driven. So at no point should you feel like you have to hold questions till the end. You can just interrupt me. I know my name is John Hackmeyer, but I do go by Hack. You can call me John, but the problem is my wife calls me John, and I'm programmed to ignore her, so I just don't hear it most of the time. So if you want to get my attention, just say, hey, Hack, and then I'll go, yes, what can I do? And we'll go from there. So, but feel free to interrupt, not a problem. So I'm going to give you a little bit about my background, kind of where I've been, what I've done, and kind of what led me to where I am now, and how I can help you all, prepare for the CISSP if you think that it is for you. Give you a few sentences on our partner here, IBEX, and just let you know a little bit more about them. And let's see what else. Sorry, I see chats popping up, and okay, that was you, Paul. All right, sorry. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some popular certifications that aren't the CISSP, because there are several out there, and kind of tell you a little bit about those and how you should think about them. I want to find out what your goals are. So at some point, don't be surprised if I ask just kind of everybody who's here, just tell me some stuff. So you will be participating, at least hopefully somebody will be, so I can understand a little bit about what your goals are and why you should be thinking about the CISSP. And if you're not familiar with something called the associate of the ISC squared, I'll explain that to you as well, because that may be an option. And then find out, are you ready? I don't know, we'll find out. And then I'm going to give you a formula for success. You can tell if you can see me on your camera, on the camera here. I'm an old person, so I've been doing this for a long time, and I can give you some good advice on how to get this done and tell you some things that you shouldn't do if you want to be successful. All right. Now, a little bit about my background. So I actually, many moons ago, was a doctoral student at Florida State University studying exercise physiologist because I wanted to be a professor. And then my wife found out that professors of physiology don't make any money. And she basically told me to get a new career. So I said, okay, well, I guess I'll do that. And I didn't know anything about computers at the time, but I said, probably should learn something. This is back in 1998. So I ended up dropping out of my doctoral program and going and with the goal of becoming a systems engineer. I didn't know what that was at first, but I had a neighbor who was, a systems engineer. Some people call it sales engineer, doesn't really matter, but I wanted to do that. So I started to learn some computer stuff and started getting some certifications, et cetera. And eventually, over the course of 2 years, found myself set up and got my first systems engineering job in August of 2000, just as the bubble was about to burst. That worked out really well. That's a separate story though. I also am an instructional designer. So I've been quite literally teaching something to somebody since the second grade. I started off in the second grade, going down to the kindergarten class and helping them learn how to read. And I've been teaching something ever since, hence the reason I wanted to be a professor at first. But I decided to study instructional design as well. Since I'm going to be teaching people, better find out, what's the best way to help people learn. I'm also a content developer. In my consultancy now, I work with companies and develop content for them for sales enablement programs and fun stuff like that around training and e-learning, et cetera. And I did spend some time in corporate America as a sales enablement leader, about 5 years, leading teams. I worked on a company called Imperva, you may have heard of. And then I led the sales enablement function at a few other companies, Carbon Black, you probably heard of as well if you're into security, Carbon Black, SentinelOne, and Tenable for a short period of time as well. And then last but not least, I also teach Kung Fu, completely unrelated to CISSP, unless you want to talk about physical security. There's my link. But I just like to put that up there because it's fun. And I actually have a couple students in the Atlanta area, and I'm up there a couple times a year through a hybrid program I have. So let me know if you want to learn how to, defend yourself. Good stuff. All right, short couple sentences on IBEX. Right, this organization, does consulting for process improvement, and also, of course, educational solutions such as CISSP, et cetera. And here's some areas of specialization that IBEX works in. And last but not least, they are 8A and woman-owned, small business or women-owned. It says small business, et cetera. So that's our friends at IBEX. A little shout out to them. Okay, now we're going to get into the meat of the material. So let's talk about some certifications not called CISSP. So the first one I want to mention is Security Plus by CompTIA. Most people are familiar with Security Plus, and it's a fine certification. One thing that's really interesting about Security Plus used to be the introductory certification. People said, oh, you want to go into security, man, you got to go get your Security Plus. And a lot of people still do that now. But one thing that I found interesting a few years ago, the folks at CompTIA changed the way this exam was set up and kind of how the content was presented. And what they did was they essentially made it very CISSP-like. And I say like in that there's a lot of topics that are very similar between Security Plus and CISSP. And by no means am I trying to say the Security Plus holds the same weight as a CISSP. It doesn't. It's not even close. But the reason I bring this up is because if you happen to be considering a Security Plus, you might want to make sure you really know about CISSP, because you may just want to skip over Security Plus and go straight for CISSP. And the reason a lot of folks in the beginning didn't do that was because the exams were very, very different. The common body of knowledge was different. And I think that most people, when they get a Security Plus, they're thinking, oh, well, I can't get CISSP because I don't meet the requirements of becoming a CISSP. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit later, because there are some requirements, but those requirements, I'm going to put them in air quotes as requirements. And there's kind of an interesting way around this, if you will. So I'll get to that a little bit later. But the Security Plus, fine certification. Some folks, still do it when they're just getting started. But if you've been in the industry a while, you probably just want to go ahead and skip past this. A couple other certifications. These are offered by the EC Council. You've probably at a minimum heard of the CEH, the Certified Ethical Hacker. Oh, and I should mention, I have my Security Plus. I also have my Certified Ethical Hacker, my CEH. I do not have the ECSA. Now, here's the interesting thing. I'm not pro CEH or against CEH, okay? But what I want you to understand is that within the corporate world, the CEH doesn't hold a whole lot of weight. It's not like you're going to get this certification and people are going, oh my gosh, they've got a CEH. I got to hire him now and pay him a ton of money. It just doesn't work that way. The CEH is a good certification for people who are interested in knowing more about kind of the hands-on side of hacking, and they just want to kind of be more knowledgeable about it. And that's really about it. So it's not a bad certification. It's just doesn't hold the weight, even in my opinion, of Security Plus, much less CISSP. And I can't speak to ECSA, I don't have one, but there are plenty of positions out there for security analysts, and EC Council generally does a good job with their education, with their certification. So maybe something to look into. Now, there's a few here from ISACA, and I put CISM on top because I used to have one. Actually, that's expired. My CEH has expired. My Security Plus is lifetime. But I did have my CISM at one point. And there are plenty of people in the industry who, when they think about getting a CISSP, sometimes they think, well, gee, should I get my CISSP from ISC squared, or should I get my CISM from ISACA? Excuse me, I'll fill that phone. So the answer is, it kind of depends what you're looking for. The CISM is very similar to the CISSP, except it looks at these same issues from a different perspective. It looks through the lens of governance, which is slightly different than kind of management, if you will. So it's a little bit different. Again, not good, bad, or otherwise, but does it hold the weight of a CISSP? No, it's kind of like the redheaded stepchild of that, genre. And I've met a couple people who have their CRISC and CISA. Again, CRISC, I think, is fairly high level, and people, some government folks I know have gotten that. And I don't know any auditors, but I've personally, but I've met some in the past, and they had their CISA. And I think if you're going to be an auditor, that's probably a fine thing to do and makes a lot of sense. And the last kind of area I want to talk about are the certifications that SANS has going on, GIAC and GSEC. Now, SANS has some good education, et cetera, and some valuable certifications. But I want to make sure you understand one main thing. SANS certifications, for the most part, those are the ones you want to go to if you want to be a hands-on practitioner. So if you don't want to be a propeller head geeky person in the weeds speaking in binary and and hex to people, SANS probably not the way to go. If you do want to be a hands-on person, they have different levels of these certifications, and they do a good job with them, and they're valuable in the industry. People know if you have a GIAC cert that you know your stuff and you can do some things. That was just not the path I took. Some people in this industry, there are different types of people, I think, overall in our industry. There are people who get paid for what they do, people who get paid for what they know, and people who get paid to manage all those other people. And the money goes up this way. And not that it's all about money, but it's something to keep in mind. And when I was starting a family, I'm like, hey, I don't really want to get paid for what I do, because that's at the bottom of the, there are some exceptions if you're a specialist in something, I get that. But in general, like if I don't want to be a firewall admin, nothing wrong with that. That's not what I want to do. I always wanted to get paid for what I knew. That's kind of my thing. And eventually I got paid to manage all those other people too, but I kind of settled in the middle as kind of the Goldilocks principle. So let me pause there just for a minute and see if there are any questions about these certifications or other ones that you may have been considering. I don't hear anybody, so I'm guessing no questions. Okay, now I get to ask you a question. What are your goals? What are you thinking about, right? Are you thinking about getting a new job? That's possible. Let's see, just pull up chat on the room here, gotcha. Okay, are you getting, a new job? Well, education, like I tell my kids, right? I told them I have, 2 in college now. Well, no, now I have 1 in college. And another one, 1 in college, 1 not in college, and another one just finishing high school. And I told them, I've got an advanced degree, but I said, I'm not too worried about whether or not you go to college. That's up to you. It's a personal decision. But what I will tell you is that education in general, and a formal education specifically, one thing it does for you is it opens doors. It gives you opportunities. So if you're thinking, hey, I want a new job in security, and I think the CISSP is a way to go, then I would agree with that. So if that happens to be a goal, you're probably looking in the right place. Money, right? Money isn't everything, but it sure pays the bills. And people who understand how to quote unquote work certifications, the CISSP is without a doubt one of the most valuable, if not the most valuable cert we have. And there's definitely ways you can position yourself and find opportunities to make more money. Status, okay? There's a little bit of status with that. If people know that you have a CISSP, they know you at a bare minimum, you have a very solid understanding of the foundation of information security. And I do want to kind of touch on that a little bit further, because I mentioned in the beginning that I teach Kung Fu, right? And I always think about this with the CISSP, and I want people to understand this. Many people look at the CISSP the same way they look at martial arts in general. And somebody will say, oh, you're taking, Taekwondo or karate or whatever it is. Why are you taking that? I'll say, oh, I want to get my black belt. And there's nothing wrong with having a goal of getting your black belt. But what a lot of people don't realize is that when they say it like that, when they say, I want to get my black belt, it implies that the black belt is the terminus. It's the end of the road. However, it's not. Achieving your black belt is actually where all the cool stuff really starts. All of the colored belts that you go through coming up through whatever art it is, those are all the foundational things. Once you get to black belt, now you get to study some really cool stuff. CISSP is similar. You don't get a CISSP because you're saying, oh, that's the end of the road. I want to get my black belt essentially and get my CISSP. No, the CISSP is nothing more than the culmination of all the knowledge underneath it into now a really cool thing called a CISSP. And now you get to start learning really cool stuff and go deeper into something you're interested in. So, but there's definitely status that comes with that. And with status, of course, comes credibility. Depending on what industry you're in, I was in security for over 20 years specifically. And whenever I had a sales rep, because I was a systems engineer and I was paired with a sales rep, I had my CISSP, but if I ever worked with a sales rep who had one, it just gave that person a lot more credibility when they walked into the room. They weren't, quote, just a sales rep. They were a security expert who happened to be a sales rep. So credibility is good. And then maybe you have some other goals. So I'm going to pause again and ask you all, tell me, are these your goals? Do you have other goals? I'm just kind of interested to hear what's out there. Let's see, full retirement. There you go. All right, well, CISSP might be able to help you get there faster. How about that? Anybody else?
Yeah, Hack, I have a question. Can you hear me?
Yeah, who's this?
This is Christopher Pringle.
Hey, Christopher.
Hey, So I haven't studied up too much on what all the CISSP covers, but I've been considering it. And I'm also working on getting just a 4-year degree in data management that's really SQL heavy. And I'm just wondering if you feel like a role in like a database administrative role would be augmented well with like some security certifications like a CISSP, or if you don't think that it would, or if you could just speak on that at all.
Yeah, so I don't claim to know a ton about database management, et cetera, but anything, if you are security minded, right, and which I always have been very security minded, and you're studying, databases, then there is no doubt there is a ton of opportunity for you, because you can just flip on the news pretty much any day and find somebody who's getting something, stolen out of a database, whether it's credit card information, PII, whatever it happens to be, et cetera. So there is no doubt that there's a ton of opportunity for you if you want to kind of take your career that direction within databases. It is definitely a big deal. And not only that, but what we're starting to see now is the prevalence of AI and machine learning, right? So all of those things come into databases, if you will. And I have, as a matter of fact, I have a client of mine now that I'm building some courseware for that is a graph database company. And of course, graph databases are becoming more and more popular, et cetera. So that's kind of a long-winded answer for me to tell you, yes, there's a ton of opportunity within database land to incorporate anything security. Does that help answer your question? If not, redirect me and I'll do better.
Oh no, absolutely. That makes sense.
Cool. Good question. All right. Anybody else? Going once, going twice. Okay. So let's talk about CISSP. And there's something called an associate of the ISC squared. So this is, I just want to spend a couple minutes here before I start pulling up bullets. So the CISSP is a certification, and it requires certain prerequisites. There's an educational prerequisite / job experience. The way that it works, and I would encourage you to go to the ISC Squared's website and validate everything I'm telling you. I don't check on this all that often, but the way I believe it is set up now, you need to have, and going back to actually something Christopher said when he said he wasn't sure about all the information that was in this, there are 8 domains. There used to be 10. They took it, did some reshuffling and some consolidation. They made it 8 domains. So there are 8 domains of knowledge within the CISSP. In order to be able to achieve your CISSP, you must have experience in at least 2 of those domains, and you have to have either 5 years of work experience in over those 2 domains, over at least 2 domains, or 4 years of experience and a college degree in anything. Okay. Now, does that mean that people who have no experience and no college degree are not eligible? And the answer is yes and no. It means they're not eligible for the CISSP. However, they are more than welcome to take the exam. And if they pass the exam, they will receive what's called an associate of the ISC Squared certificate. And what that essentially means is, if I were to get that, it would mean that I know a lot about security. I happen not to have a degree. I happen not to have any work experience, but I know some stuff about security, and I proved that because I passed that exam. So that would mean I would receive my associate of the ISC Squared. Now, part of having an associate certification or the CISSP means that you have to keep up your, what would they call CPEs, or continuing professional education units, right? And I think right now it's 120 hours over the course of 3 years, which is basically 40 hours a year. And the CPE stuff isn't terribly difficult to understand, but that's not what we're here to talk about. What I want you to understand is that even if you get your associate of the ISC squared and you have no experience and you have no college degree, that means that you, as long as you keep up your CPEs 120 hours over the course of those 3 years, what would happen is, let's take Christopher as an example. Let's say Christopher has no experience and he's not done with his degree yet. That means he either needs to get 5 years experience or 4 years and his degree. So he's working on his degree. Well, let's say he gets his degree next year. Okay. Well, the associate of the ISC squared certification is good for 3 years. Well, at the end of those 3 years, he still won't have enough work experience. He'll have a degree, but he'll only have, even if he has work experience, he'll still only have 3 years, even if he had that. And then he would need 1 more year, and then he would get his CISSP. So the point being is that as long as you maintain your CPEs, your associate will renew at the 3-year mark. And eventually, when your degree and or your job experience catches up to that 5 years or 4 years in a degree, it automatically rolls into a CISSP. You don't have to do anything. You don't have to take a test. You don't even have to notify the ISC squared. They know. And then boom, one day you're magically a CISSP. So that's why I encourage everybody to go ahead and go for the CISSP, because if you're security minded, you're interested in it, and you can pass the exam, heck, doesn't matter. If you get your associate of the ISC squared and you put that on your email signature, people are going to look at that and they're going to go, oh, well, he doesn't have a CISSP, but he obviously passed the exam. This guy knows, or this girl or whatever, knows about security. So don't be discouraged if you don't meet the quote unquote requirements of a CISSP. Stay focused and go get it anyway. Get your associate and then just let it roll into it. Let me pause there for a second because that was a mouthful. Any questions on the CISSP and the associate of the ISC squared? Okay. So why do you want to get your CISSP in the first place? Well, it's very well respected. It is extremely valuable. And I highlighted the word here. I put it not highlighted. I put it in all caps. It is an information security management certification. And that's an important thing to understand. A lot of people go into this and they think, oh, I looked into the CISSP and I saw there's a bunch of stuff on networking and there's a bunch of stuff on applications on programming, and there's a bunch of stuff on cryptography. It must be a technical exam. The answer is no, it's not. And this is a difficult area for some people to understand. It is a security management exam. Now, are there a bunch of technical things that you have to understand? The answer is yeah, you do. But the reason you have to understand them is because you have to make decisions on this exam about what a manager would do in certain situations. And if that manager doesn't understand how these things work, he or she cannot make good decisions. So do I teach people all about symmetric cryptography and asymmetric cryptography and talk about AES and all kinds of fun cryptographic things? Yeah, I do. And they have to understand them. But you're not going to get questions on the exam specifically about, like, as an example, they're not going to say, how many different rounds does the AES algorithm require or something? Nobody cares about that. You can go look that up, go Google it if you want, right? What they are going to care about is that as a manager, that when it's appropriate to utilize AES versus maybe an RSA algorithm, which is asymmetric. Like, do you understand the differences between those and when to use them? So that is a really big thing for people to understand, that it is a management certification, but yes, you must understand technical stuff. Okay. CISSP also gives you a nice solid understanding about across a wide array of information. And like I said, there's 8 different domains. And it's funny because one of the questions I like to ask people when they're in my class is I'll say, how many different domains are there in the CBK, which stands for Common Body of Knowledge, which is what you're being tested on. And they'll say 8 really enthusiastically. I'm like, no. I'm like, it's only one domain. It's broken into 8 different areas so your feeble little brain can deal with it. But the reality is that these 8 domains are all connected, right? So if you don't understand this stuff and you can't make connections between these quote unquote different domains, which are not different at all, they're just divisions of the same one domain, which is InfoSec, you're going to have some troubles. But this, you understand the material here and you can talk about it professionally, you're well on your way. And of course, I talked about this before, credibility. So if you happen to, I worked in sales for a long time. So if you have a CISSP and you go into a meeting about security, done. You don't have to tell them what your credentials are. You need that one credential. They know exactly that you know what you're talking about. And another thing that's nice is that it's vendor agnostic. Now, there are plenty of other certifications that are popular right now that are vendor specific, right? And a lot of, if you know anything about our field, you know that cloud is becoming more and more popular, right? Everything's in the cloud. Well, there are certifications. As a matter of fact, the ISC squared actually has a cloud certification, and it's fine. I don't know people who have done it just because it's vendor agnostic, which normally isn't a bad thing. But because of where we are in our kind of technology, journey right now, people want people who are certified in AWS or Azure or GCP or whatever it happens to be. So there are some vendor specific things that are very popular now, specifically in the area of cloud. But when it comes to overall understanding of security, vendor agnostic wins every time. And the CISSP is number one, has been for a long time now. And the ISC squared has done a fantastic job of keeping this certification valuable and relevant. So something to keep in mind. All right, so are you ready? First question I have is, are you serious? Because if you're not going to make it, right? There's a lot of information. It's the process is challenging. And if it's one of those things where you're like, yeah, well, I'm kind of thinking about it, I guess I'll check it out, you're not going to do it. So you got to be serious about it first. Are you ready to work? So when I got mine, I got my CISSP back in 2003 or 4. I don't remember anymore. A long time ago. But what I do know is at that time, I was a full-time systems engineer at Symantec. I was a full-time graduate student through UMUC. And I was also working to get this certification. And I had a wife, 2 kids, and a third one about to be born. So I was plenty busy, but I made the time, and you just have to buckle down and do it. Now, I'll tell you one mistake I see a lot of people make. I've seen it because I've been teaching this now for 15, 16 years. One of the mistakes that people make is that they drag this process out. They say, oh, I'm going to work on my CISSP and it'll take me 6 months and et cetera. I'm like, oh my God, don't do that. You have to attack the CISSP as a sprint. And I'll give you more specific guidance in a few minutes. But you got to be ready to work, and you got to work hard, but it's only for a short period of time, like maybe 2 months, you can get it done. And are you ready to listen? I say that because I've been an instructor for a very long time. And of course, there are always people who, talk and wait to talk again. They don't actually talk and then listen. But you have to be able to listen and understand what me or your instructor or somebody's telling you, because this exam, and I'm not exaggerating when I tell you this, if you look at any of the books on the market, there's a ton of books, anywhere from this thick to this thick. You could know every single fact inside any of those books and still fail the exam. And the reason is the exam doesn't care what you know. There are plenty of exams out there that you have to tell them, the exam, here's what I know. This is not like it. It doesn't care what you know. It cares how you use what you know. And that is a very different skill. So a lot of times I have to coach people on how to listen properly and how to think like the ISC squared wants you to think. Okay, so now we're getting down where the rubber meets the road. What's the formula for success? You know, how do I do this? How do I get through it? Step number one, listen to me. I'm old. I've been doing it a long time. I usually don't talk numbers, but if it makes you feel any better, the global first time pass rate for the CISSP exam is somewhere around 70%. My first time pass rate for my students over the last, like I said, 15 or 16 years is actually about 90%, maybe a little higher. And it's not because I'm the smartest guy on the block, because I'm not, but I am a good instructor and I know what it takes. And I tell people all the time, if you just listen to me and do what I tell you to do the way I tell you to do it, you have a really good chance of passing. If you deviate, you're on your own, right? So that's step number one. Step number two, equally important. See step number one, right? You got to listen. Now, I say that kind of tongue in cheek, but it's true. Let's see a chat here. Oh yeah, good one. But it's true. So now a little more specific stuff. So like I said, you have to plan for 6 to 8 weeks of solid effort. You've got to be committed to doing this. And I teach CISSP now about 5 or 6 times a year for a very specific client of mine who I will not reveal their name, but I will tell you they are the largest networking company in the world. Okay. And I teach these classes for them, like I said, probably 5, 6 times a year, anywhere from 15 to 35 people in the classes, and still have very high success rates, right? So 6 to 8 weeks, and this is the same guidance I give them, 6 to 8 weeks of solid effort. The first thing you have to do, read the freaking book. Now, there are a lot of different books. I can always tell somebody which one is my favorite and why. And there are some that I'm not a big fan of, but whatever book you pick, read it. Now, that doesn't mean study it. It means read it. And I tell people all the time, because I do this with this client, we have meetings about 6 weeks before the actual class delivery. And I tell people, read the book. Don't even come to my class if you haven't read the book. You're wasting my time and you're wasting yours. I don't care if you understand a single word in the book. I don't care. Just read it. I need the words to cross your eyes at some point in time before the class, and then I can work with you. So that's why I tell people, read the book. The other thing is schedule the exam, because that's going to force you mentally to be a little more focused, right? Some people say, well, I just kind of read the book. I'll take the class. I'll see how it goes. You do that, you're never going to do it. Just schedule the exam. And generally what I tell people is, like, as an example, you could read any of these books by reading 20 pages a day for 5 to 6 weeks. So there's your 6 weeks. We'll make it 5 weeks. 5 weeks. Then take some type of a class, boot camp style, whether it's 1 week, sometimes they shorten the days and they make it 2 weeks, whatever. But take a class with an instructor who knows what they're doing. Now, I'll be the first one to tell you, there are tons and tons of people who teach CISSP prep. There's a very short list of people, including myself, who are at the top of the game. And there's a bunch of people that you can take class from, but there's a few of us that you want to take class from. But take a class. Now, once you've taken that class, you should have already scheduled your exam for about 1 to 2 weeks after the end of the class. Do not wait. The longer you wait, the more information will run from your head. It's better just to, schedule the exam maybe about a month out from what would be. So let's say you've got 2 weeks before you take a class, and then you're going to take a class, that's 3 weeks. And then you can schedule the exam for like either the week after that or the week after that. But the point is, you can get this whole thing done in 6 to 8 weeks. And you have to learn how to think like a CISSP. right? Like I said, the exam doesn't care what you know. It cares about how you use what you know. So I'm going to give you an example here of how to think like a CISSP. So here's an example question. Now I am going to ask people to read this question I'm about to put up, and I do want to hear answers. Okay, so you guys have to come off mute or do whatever you got to do to give me some answers. But I'm going to let you read the question first. This is a very kind of, relatively typical type of a question you would see. Okay, so I'm going to give you a second to read that. All right, before I put the answers up, I want you to notice something. This is very common. They'll say, which is the best? And they put it in all caps and they boldface it. First step. Now, before I put the answers up here, you're always going to have 4 choices for your answers. And let me tell you, most of the time, at least 3 of them are good answers. In the one I'm about to show you, all 4 are good answers. You have to pick the best answer. So let me put the 4 up here. Let me explain the first one. Take pictures of the surrounding area. You have to think of, like, before COVID, we were all in offices and something like that. So you're thinking about, like, if somebody worked in a cubicle or something, you'd be taking pictures of the surrounding area where they worked, okay? And then, of course, unplug the system from the network, gather the contents of RAM, and make a bit level copy of the hard drive. And I will tell you again, depending where you work, any one of these answers is perfectly legit. None of these is a throwaway. So now, who wants to go ahead and take a guess at which is the correct answer?
That
Okay, Paul, was that? I didn't hear your answer.
there's just a couple. I've several people have said D.
D as in
B.
Delta?
I had a D as in David and a B as in Bravo. Anything
Okay.
else?
Anybody else?
Bravo was another one.
Okay. How about you, Christopher? Let's see. Did you pop in here?
Yeah, I'm struggling a little bit, but I'm leaning toward Bravo myself.
Okay. All right. So great answers. I love where you guys' heads are at. And there's the answer. So let's talk about this for a minute. Now that you know the answer, can anybody tell me why that's the right answer?
Somebody saying if they could follow the memory, and so they could lose it if they don't.
Yeah. So the bottom line is the concept you have to be aware of here is the concept of volatility. And the idea is that when you're doing forensics, you want to gather information from anything that's highly volatile, right? Like RAM. If somebody kicks out the power plug, all that RAM is gone, right? You can take pictures of the surrounding area anytime. Now, unplugging that from the network makes sense too, because people say, oh, I don't want it to spread. That's true. And that could be the right answer depending where you work, but that's not the right answer here. And making a bit level copy of the hard drive, of course, everybody does that. You don't work on the original hard drive, you work on a copy of the hard drive. So that makes sense. But again, in the context of this question, you have to be aware that RAM is volatile and you will lose forensic information if it gets power cycled. So get that first and then worry about the other stuff.
He said, unless it's ransomware.
Well, even if it's ransomware, if you can get in there and get it, but at ransomware, you're probably sitting there looking at them going, I'm going to have to pay $11 million to get my files back. Yeah. You still want to know what's in there. Yeah, that whole ransomware, don't get me started on that. But yeah, so this is the type of question. Now, I also want you to be aware that there is not a resource on the planet that you can go to and get questions that you're going to see on the exam. Like there's a bunch of brain dumps for all these other types of exams, and you can go actually see questions that you'll actually see on the exam. That will never happen here. Okay, the ISC squared has done a masterful job of doing that, of keeping that off the market. Also, many of the questions, different vendors who offer questions, they're really not all that valuable because they're too simple and they don't make you think properly. This question, while it is honestly, it's a pretty simple question, it requires you to think like a CISSP needs to think. So just be aware of that. But there's definitely a ton of resources in terms of practice questions. And even though you're not going to get ones that you're going to see on the test, it's still good to do them from a good resource, because you need to learn how to think properly. And some of the resources are better. So I can always help somebody with that. So that's my example question. And we're at 10 minutes to the top of the hour. And that was what I wanted to present. And now I'll go ahead, take a breath, grab a drink, and let you all come up with some questions.
Any other questions or?
I have a question, Hack.
Sure.
It's Chris again. I'm just wondering, whenever you teach these classes, are you teaching it on like behalf of a company, or is that like a private practice of yours?
So the answer is yes. I do both. It just kind of depends.
Gotcha.
So I have a question here in the class. Are there workbooks for these types of, like, they have the book, but are there associated workbooks that they can work through?
I'm not sure what the workbook would contain. If somebody can maybe expand on what they're thinking.
Scenario questions.
So not workbooks per se. There might be some books on Amazon of practice questions. That would be the closest thing. But yeah, there's also a couple of websites, and I won't advertise for people right now, but if somebody wants to contact me later, more than happy to share. I have a good friend of mine for the last 20 years or whatever, who has a website that has a lot of really, really good questions and practice exams and stuff like that. And the reason I say they're good is because they make you think, right? Not because you're going to go do them and then see the same question on the exam. That's not what it's about. But yes, there are, and you can go find books of practice questions. And even the ISC Squared offers books of practice questions that are retired questions. And those are great to look at, because while they're not questions now, they were before. And that gives you a little bit of insight into how the questions are developed. Anybody else?
How often does a test change? Is there a cycle that they go through?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the answer is not very often, but it just changed this past May. And the changes, though, were very minor. Most of the changes were around where information is located in which domain. And maybe they added a couple little pieces about different, parts of the information. It was not a big change. The biggest change of all came, God, I don't know, it must have been 5-7 years ago now. I don't remember, where they made it all online. The test is, computer-based. We'll call it computer-based. And it's also adaptive in nature. The test used to be a paper exam in person, 250 questions, a maximum of 6 hours to do it. That's the old days. That's what I did. The way it works now, you register for the exam through like Pearson VUE or somebody like that. And you go take the exam at a place, and I don't know if IBEX does that stuff as well, but that's possible. But you go in and you have a maximum of 3 hours to take the exam. It's computer-based and it's adaptive. And what I mean by adaptive is that in the first 100 questions that you receive, it's doing an analysis. And let's just say you are blowing it away, man. You know your stuff inside and out. The exam stops at 100 questions, says, congratulations, you passed, done. The opposite is true too. If in the first 100 questions, you're a complete moron and you don't know anything, it just says, there's nothing we can do. You just need to go away, and you fail. However, if in the first 100 questions, they're like, well, they're doing okay, they could pass, It's possible. Let's keep asking them some more questions. They will give you another 50 questions. And in that other 50, then they'll say, yes, you've earned, a pass or you haven't. But it's still blocked out. 3 hours is the maximum amount of time. 150 questions is the maximum. 100 is the minimum.
What's the passing score out of that?
So the passing score is something that you will never see. It is 700 points, but nobody knows what that means because it doesn't equate to 70%. It is just 700 points out of a possible 1,000 points. Now, here's the really weird part. If you pass the exam, they just say, congratulations, you passed. You never get a score. So I always tell people, I said, as far as I know, I didn't miss a single question. Which is true. I don't know. I wasn't informed. So I'd like to think that I got it all right, but the reality, I probably got a 701. Who knows? But what they do now, this is one big change they made that I really hate, but the ISC squared does thing. I'm not a big fan of the ISC squared from a business perspective. And this is one of those examples. What they used to do when you failed the exam was the only time you got your score. And that was really helpful for people like me as an instructor, because I could look at somebody, if you needed 700 points and you got a 698, I'd be like, go in there in a week, get it done. You're so close. Just brush up on a few things and go, 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 go. But if somebody failed with a 450, I'm like, you might want to consider a new career. Like, you're not going to make this thing, right? But now they don't do that. You don't even get your score when you fail. Now what they do is they give you some BS report that shows the 8 domains, and it says either above competency, near competency, below competency. I don't know the terminology that they use, but it's some vague crap that doesn't tell you anything other than, yeah, you did okay here and you didn't do so well here. So that is a real big challenge for instructors to be able to guide people. So my best advice is just pass the exam, and then you don't have to worry about it. Great question, though.
Any other questions in the room, or?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. She's asking if you get the ISC and you don't have enough experience in some of the domains, how does the ISC know that when you've got the experience?
Because they know the date that you passed, and they know what the requirements were on the date that you passed. And then if you keep up your CPEs, which you have to log in to their website and keep those up, then in the background, when it hits that 5-year mark, as an example, then they'll look at you and, well, they'll actually, if you hit the 5-year mark and you've kept up your CPEs, they'll validate, I think, that you have the work experience now. So I think they reach out to you and say, hey, we think you're eligible to get your CISSP now. Can you, show us your resume, that kind of a thing. You do have to prove that you've been working in the field. But yes, they will automatically reach out to you.
Very good.
And there's a question here in the chat about how many attempts can be made for this exam. The answer is infinite. The ISC squared will take your money as many times as you want to give it to them. They are perfectly fine with that. I would suggest that you not give them more money than you need to. But yeah, they'll keep taking it. They don't care.
Okay, I think that brings us to near the top of the hour. Hack, thank you very much for the time.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
And in means of closing, our next meeting will be in July. It will be back here at Dobbins Air Force Base in the the club room that we have traditionally met in, and it'll be Steve Latham, the CEO and founder of Banyan Hills, talking on the IoT landscape. And in August, we've got Greg Fordham, the founder of Celestial Defense. We'll discuss the cyber incident, and that's a really long title, but it is very key in understanding how you respond to a cyber incident. So that should be interesting as well. Keep an eye out for the emerging leader activities coming up soon. They're trying to set up some regular recurring events. And this event, or today's event, and all of the others that we've had recently are posted on our Atlanta YouTube channel. So thank you guys for attending. Have a good day.
Thanks, everybody. Take care. Best of luck.
Thanks, guys.